What is going on, everybody? It's your boy John, and welcome back to Gearbox. So today we got yet another video for you on a topic that we all know and love, and that is essentially the 2024 Ford Raptor to the comparable Dodge Ram TRX. Now, before we get into anything, I know that the TRX is technically, at least in my opinion, let's call it a half a step above the base Raptor and a half a step below the Raptor R, but we're gonna compare them anyway. And to be honest with you guys, I'm not a big Dodge Ram guy in general, but I did look at the TRX when it came to purchasing this truck, which ultimately landed on the Raptor, but I did consider it. And the reason being is, I feel like when you get into the realm of some of these like crazy modded from factory trucks, the brand and just the shit that comes with, I guess, stereotypes kind of goes out the window because you're in a class of your own in a lot of ways. So that's why I was open to looking at the TRX, but once again, ultimately settled on the 2024 Ford Raptor. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So for starters, right off the bat, we have price point, and this is really a big piece of why I say the TRX is a half a step above the Raptor and a half a step below the Raptor R. So the Ford Raptor typically, especially in a used market, comes in around 80 grand or so, where the TRX is around 90 to 95 compared to the Raptor R, which is well over 100, let's call it 110 just to be safe. Now, you know, is 10 grand a little bit different when it comes to financing and stuff like that? No, not really. But just in general, it kind of feels better purchasing a 5-figure truck rather than a 6-figure truck. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, in the same vein as a supercharged V8 versus a twin turbo V6, we get into the horsepower numbers. The stock Raptor is at 450 horsepower, whereas the Ram TRX is at 700 horsepower in the same ball field as the Raptor R. Now, once again, of course, there's a lot of comparisons that can be made back and forth, but really the way I look at it from a, let's call it pricing perspective, is the Raptor, as mine stands right now, is a hell of a lot more dailyable than the TRX. And really that horsepower number is a big part in that. You know, if you're buying something that crazy, yeah, I guess theoretically you can daily anything if you put your mind to it, I guess. But it wouldn't be super enjoyable, super torquey, a lot of power. And especially when you get on the topic of road trips and stuff like that, it just becomes a little bit of a burden. Now, on the same note as that, from a daily ability perspective, of course, a V6 twin turbo engine, such as the Ford Raptor, is going to be at a minimum marginally better, if not drastically better, in gas mileage. And keep in mind, guys, from my perspective, I love this truck. I would love to drive this truck all day, every day, and that's totally fine. And I do. But a big part in my purchase of a truck, or let's call it validation for owning a truck, is not just driving around the city, but it is road trips. And when I'm driving 400, 500 miles at a time, that becomes a big point of emphasis. And driving a gas guzzling V8, as much as I would love to do that, it just really doesn't make sense to me. So as with anything in life, or at least from a standpoint of purchasing vehicles, make sure that you know your mission before you just go off and blow a wad of cash on a cool truck. All of them are cool. I would arguably say equally cool. Definitely different strokes for different folks, if you know what I'm putting down. Now, of course, a truck such as the Ford Raptor or the Ram TRX is great from the engine perspective, the transmission perspective, and what have you. But a big reason why these trucks demand what they do is not because of how fast they can go in a straight line, but because the fact that they are essentially, in a lot of ways, a street legal Baja truck. So let's talk about suspension. On the Ford Raptor, we have Fox dual valve suspension, and on the TRX, we have Bilstein. Now, to a lot of people, myself included, the suspension is probably a toss-up. And the reason I say that is both of those companies, Fox and Bilstein, have a phenomenal track record in all that they do. And really, it would take a superhuman ability to understand the metrics on the actual suspension itself to really tell a difference. Now, what I will say, having owned my Ford Raptor for about a month now at this point, this Fox suspension is unreal. I just love it. I've never experienced anything like it. But I also understand the fact that the Bilstein shocks on the TRX are probably equally as good. Maybe there are some slight pros and cons depending on surfaces that you're driving on, I guess. You know, there's a lot of circumstances here that can be taken into account as variables, but both of them are great. I wouldn't choose which truck you own based on which brand suspension there is. And let's be honest, if you really want to mess with the suspension on a truck of this caliber, you can do that. I personally won't, but whatever suits your fancy, you do you. Now let's talk about one of the biggest reasons why I ultimately chose the Raptor over the TRX. And of course, there's a lot of reasons, right? But one of the biggest things that kept just sticking in my mind was the fact that the Ford Raptor, relatively speaking, has been around longer than the TRX. And for those of you who are unaware, let me explain. And for those of you who know, you know. But when it comes to first or second year or iteration productions of vehicles in general or specific trims, a lot of times there are some, let's say, things that need to be ironed out that don't exactly go as planned off the bat. And with the Raptor, I forget when it came into production, but it's been around for quite some time. The TRX, on the other hand, was kind of a big, oh, Ford, you think you can do a little bit better than Dodge? Why don't you hold my beer and watch this? And so they don't have as much of a track record. And to some people, that's fine. But for me, aside from being a big Ford fan in general, I wanted to have something that was in a lot of ways tried and true. And just from the longevity and the reliability standpoint, and yes, I know, insert all the Ford memes here, but that's just how I thought, and I think that's something that should be taken into account. Now, am I super well versed in the TRX issues or potential issues? No, not necessarily. Didn't get that deep into research before I purchased said truck, which obviously didn't end up being a TRX. But that is something to consider, once again, especially dependent on your mission. For me, I don't want to be stuck in BFE, Kentucky on my way home to Ohio and my shit breaks down, right? There are a lot of different things that could happen and go wrong. And yes, trucks are trucks and they're mechanical things and things fail, and that's totally fine. I'm okay with that and I'm at peace at that. But I would like to think that purchasing a, let's call it $80,000 truck is going to be a little more reliable than some and not leave you stranded on the side of the road, which ultimately can happen with a brand new generation vehicle such as the TRX. Now, on that same line, as far as mission and kind of what your overall goal is with the truck, here's another thing to keep in mind. The Ram TRX only comes in a crew cab configuration, and the Raptor comes in multiple configurations. I would say most popularly, we do have the Super Crew Cab in the Ford terminology, but you also have the two-door, let's call it straight up Baja vehicle. Now, to 94% of people, let's call it, That's really just going to be what do I prefer? How many kids do I have? What's, you know, how much do I haul or whatever? How many road trips do I go on in a year? And that's fine. And that's going to be the majority of us, and that's okay. But especially if you're looking to get into some more crazy stuff, let's call it, maybe a 2-door is going to suit you better than a long 4-door Baja truck. And once again, that's something to keep in mind. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just something to consider before purchasing the truck. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here, as I slightly mentioned earlier, is the transmissions in either truck. The Ford F-150 Raptor comes with the 10-speed transmission that we all know and love, or all know and hate, but regardless, a 10-speed automatic with the ability to flip it into manual mode, hit the paddle shifters, blah, blah, blah. The TRX, on the other hand, comes in an 8-speed transmission. Now, all of this is better than a standard 4-speed back in the day, right? You got more gears, you got better gear ratios, so on and so forth. But once again, it goes down to what's your mission. In a lot of ways, the fewer gears that you have will theoretically decrease your gas mileage. And if you're buying a supercharged V8 truck, you probably don't give a shit about gas mileage. But once again, for me, I do to an extent. I'm not buying this truck as a economy vehicle, but I do want to be able to go to and from without stopping every 220 miles to fill up my gas tank for 120 bucks and hate my life every time I'm doing it. So something to keep in mind. Once again, it's what's your mission? What are you doing with the truck? And how does that engine or transmission or whatever suits you for the needs that you want the truck for? I would say the majority of us are buying these trucks to drive to work or whatever. And so it's not super, super, super important to have all the crazy off-roady stuff, other than the fact that it's cool to say that I drive a Raptor, and it's cool to feel the Fox suspension actually working as it should within limits of the road, right? There's a lot of stuff like that just think about it. You know, 20 grand extra on a price tag or something isn't the biggest deal ever when it comes to financing, but it is still a lot of money regardless. You know, we're talking about high 5, low 6-figure trucks. So buy what you want. Don't just settle. You know, do your research. Make sure that you're putting yourself in a good position to where you don't drive off the lot and then 5 days later you're like, damn, this truck's just okay. You know, make sure you love it, and I promise you it'll be worth it in the end. But guys, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you liked it. If you did, drop a big fat thumbs up. Of course, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please don't hesitate to drop them in the comment section down below. And as always, guys, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell. You know the drill. Until next time, peace.